Hi everyone, my name is Kirsty Crossy. So today we are going to take an in-depth look at Henry Morgentaler, his life, and how he has shaped and changed the world of medicine throughout his career. So we're going to start by doing a little synopsis of who he is, what he's known for, and some facts about him. So Henry is a well-known abortion advocate and physician. He was born March 19th, 1923 in Lodz, Poland. After a long and rather successful career, Henry died May 29th, 2013 in Toronto, Ontario. He was born Jewish and endured the struggle of the Holocaust. He was a survivor of Auschwitz before coming to Canada in 1950. After his arrival, he attended the Université de Montréal, where he studied to become a physician. So we're going to take a look at abortion and how it stands prior to Henry Morgentaler's campaigning for change. So we're going to start back in 1967. Pierre Trudeau was the acting justice minister and pushed for two bills that would decriminalize homosexuality, as well as decriminalizing the distribution of contraceptives and the info about them, which for us is different now, where we've always known for contraceptives to be easy to get. Most of our peers and people that we've worked with, interact with on a daily basis, have or do take at one point in their life. But we fail to forget that there was a point of time where contraceptives weren't as easily accessible. So, although both bills were not passed until 1969, when Pierre became Prime Minister, in part to these bills was a section where abortions were made legal. However, it was mandated that they may only be performed in a hospital, and the woman must face the hospital's therapeutic abortion committee to obtain approval. The panel would then only approve an abortion if it was proven that indeed the woman's health was in danger as a result of the pregnancy. It was then, in 1969, as Henry was advocating and pressing the government to grant women the rights to their own bodies, including the choice of whether to bear a child, had become highly publicized by the media. Henry began to receive many inquiries regarding an abortion as a result of his endless efforts for change. Thus, Henry decided to devote his practice to family planning. Although the clinic's main purpose was to perform abortions, he had performed vasectomies, IUD placements, and provided contraceptives. So for those of us who are not sure what an IUD is, it is a form of contraceptive. It almost looks like a Y, where it is placed into the cervix of the woman and is in place for 3 years generally prior to needing to be removed. The IUDs are continuously hormone outputs that very much work the same as the contraceptive pills. The difference being is that there is no remembering when to take your pills, or if you're using like the rings, which back when this was taking place was not something that was available. But the IUDs would stay in place. You would go and see your OBGYN to have them look to ensure that the placement was proper, any adverse reactions that you might be having to it. So it is a neat little alternative to contraceptives instead of the pill. So after performing over 5,000 abortions safely and successfully, Henry decided to take it to the media once again in hopes of changing the federal and provincial government laws. As this took place in 1973, when the laws of abortion were still very strict, Henry was arrested and charged for defying the law. Henry stood before a jury advocating for women's reproductive rights. A jury had found him not guilty. Appalled by the jury's decision, the Quebec Court of Appeal overturned the ruling of not guilty in April of 1974 and found Henry guilty of defying the law against abortions and performing them in his clinics. He was then sentenced to imprisonment. This was the start of 3 jury trials that led to the Parliament passing a criminal code amendment that took away the judge's ability to order imprisonment. As a result, Henry Morgentaler was acquitted of all of his charges. In 1983, Henry had established clinics in Toronto and Winnipeg. Despite abortion still being illegal unless performed in a hospital and after the approval from the committee, police raided the Toronto clinic where Henry, along with 2 of his associates, Robert Scott and Leslie Smoling, were accused of conspiring to act in the procedure of a miscarriage, which we know as abortion. In 1988, Henry petitioned the Supreme Court of Canada regarding the abortion laws and regulations of abortion in Canada, which resulted in legalization of abortions based on the conflict of human rights that was guaranteed by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom. Thus, abortions were then to be governed by provincial and medical regulations. So we went through a transition that instead of abortions being a federal legislation, each provincial area was able to regulate and have their guidelines for abortions, and then the medical regulations. So the medical regulations would include safety procedures, timelines. So as we had learned earlier in the course with the topic of abortion, is that we are able to get certain types or certain methods of abortions at different times of pregnancy. So when we are doing them, we're looking at how far along gestation the mother is and correlating that to what would be our best practice in ensuring that the mother at the end of it is going to be safe. We're looking at the adverse effects that are going to occur with the different methods of abortion. What we go by the rule of thumb is if the abortion is going to take place earlier on in gestation, then we are going to choose the method that is the most, the least invasive to provide safety to the mother and hopefully decrease the complications that may occur. So we're going to go over some fun facts about Henry Morgentaler and the change of abortions. So Henry traveled across Canada performing speaking engagements and fundraising tours for women's reproductive rights throughout his career. This was not limited to one segregated area. He actually went all over from Ontario to the Maritimes and everywhere. His primary goal at that time was not just how a woman should have the right of her body, whether she would like to bear children, and the choices that she should have from the Canadian Charters of Rights and Freedom as being a Canadian citizen, but it was also to talk about the procedure of abortions, normalizing the methods that were used, showing how they can be done safely, and as well, it was very much to answer the questions of people who didn't understand why abortions were needed, or why somebody would want one, or why we would do them, or why it should be legal. So it was very much an educational process. So we're going to go over some fun facts about Henry Morgentaler and the change of abortions. So Henry traveled across Canada performing speaking engagements and fundraising tours for women's reproductive rights throughout his career. This was not limited to one segregated area. He actually went all over, from Ontario to the Maritimes and everywhere. His primary goal at that time was not just how a woman should have the right of her body, whether she would like to bear children, and the choices that she should have from the Canadian Charters of Rights and Freedom as being a Canadian citizen, but it was also to talk about the procedure of abortions, normalizing the methods that were used, showing how they can be done safely, and as well, it was very much to answer the questions of people who didn't understand why abortions were needed, or why somebody would want one, or why we would do them, or why it should be legal. So it was very much an educational process. Now, one fact that I found was very interesting is that although abortions are now legal in Canada, women still face difficulties today to obtain one. There are many factors that go into this, but some factors that affect the ability is the location. Some rural areas are not equipped to provide abortion services, and therefore they may have to travel to a bigger city to get an abortion. The process that Ontario seems to have, through my education my research that I've done, is that abortion is not just a walk in and, okay, I would like one, we can do it now. It's actually way more than that, where they sit down and you go through counseling, so very much like it was back in the early 80s, but it's not to see whether you can or cannot do one. It's about ensuring that an abortion is being done for the right reasons, that you're not being coerced into getting an abortion because, say, the father wants it done, and maybe it's an abusive background that's being forcing you to get it, but it's not the woman's choice. She feels like she has to, not that she wants to. From there, you talk with the doctors, and they provide many resources for counseling post-abortion, resources, support groups, many things that women now have access to. But it is a bit of a longer process. As much as it is a very quick process, it depends on how the clinic that the woman is going to deals with the holistic view, because that's where the main fundamentals of the abortion is now, where it's not just a surgical procedure. Now we're looking at the holistic aspect of it, because we know that even if a woman is choosing to have an abortion, that psychologically and emotionally there might be some barriers that she suffers prior to and after. Feelings of guilt, feelings of the what ifs. What if I didn't do it? What if I was still pregnant? What if I was having my baby? So we look at the whole aspect of it, which is a very big change from what it was 20 years ago. So Henry was also the first physician to perform the vacuum aspiration method in Canada. This is known to be the safest method when performing an abortion. It's generally done at the earlier stages, but Henry was the first one to actually perform it in Canada. So, Henry took many provincial governments to court over closures of his clinics and the refusal to fund abortions in privatized clinics. Just in 2003, which is not that long ago, Henry brought forth a lawsuit against the New Brunswick government due to refusal to pay for abortions performed in privatized clinics. So, like we had talked about earlier, there was a shift from the federal law for abortions down to now being regulated through provincial and medical regulations. So we would see a contrast from province to province and how they carry out their abortions. So what Ontario offers and provides for abortions in contrast is different to what New Brunswick or Alberta would be able to provide, or what their rules and regulations were in performing. So it was very cool that Henry was so passionate about his work that he went to the extent of actually forming a lawsuit against the government. So Henry had retired from his practice in 2006, but he still continued to supervise his remaining clinics until his death in May of 2013. Around the time of Henry's death, there was a lot of pressure from social conservatives and pro-life activists to reopen the abortion debate in Canada. We still see a lot of this today. I find that it's not very publicized about, but there are many clinics that are in even downtown Toronto where they have pro-life activists outside of the front doors that are picketing against abortions. This is also a factor that hinders women from being able to obtain an abortion based on the fact of the ridicule that they can endure just by going into the clinic. And as much as they try to be proactive about maintaining the dignity and respect and the rights of the woman, we can't just stop the pro-life activists' right to freedom of speech. So it is very interesting that this all started to happen right around the time of Henry's death. Somebody who has worked and is really well known around the world for his works in abortion and how it is the right of the woman. So last but not least, Henry had received many awards for his commitment and his work. So some of these that he had received were the Humanist of the Year Award from the American Humanist Association in 1975, so pretty early on in his career. He also received the Honorary Doctor of Law Award from the University of Western Ontario in 2005. And he also received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Humanist Association of Canada in 2008, as well as Award for Outstanding Service to Humanity from the Canadian Labour Congress in 2008. So this man has quite well recognized, very successful, and has really been the frontier of abortion, not just in how it is done and the safety, but also of women's rights. It's amazing how one individual has changed so much in which in reality is a short period of time in his career. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this presentation, that you guys learned a lot about Henry Morgentaler. If you guys have any questions, you guys can post them and I will respond to them. Thanks. Have a good weekend.